two of the worst things someone can be are a Nazi and a torturer. To combine both is a special kind of reprehensible. Yet, what happens when the face of that evil isn't what you expect? Not the jackbooted SS officer, but a young woman who, just months earlier, might have been a shop assistant, a nurse, or a factory worker. This is the story of Ravensbrück, the only major Nazi concentration camp built exclusively for women. But our focus isn't on the 132,000 female prisoners who suffered within its walls. Instead, we turn our lens to the other women, the 3,500 female guards, or Aufseherinnen, who willingly participated in one of history's darkest chapters. Welcome to the infamous past, where we see how ordinary German women transformed into instruments of terror. In the winter of 1938, as Europe teetered on the brink of war, construction began on a new type of concentration camp in the forests near Fürstenberg, about 50 miles north of Berlin. Unlike other camps in the growing Nazi network, Ravensbrück was designed specifically to house female prisoners, political opponents, resistance fighters, Jews, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, and women deemed asocial by the regime. By May 1939, the first 867 women prisoners arrived. Transferred from the overcrowded Lichtenberg camp, they were met by a cadre of female guards under the command of Oberaufseherin, Chief Guard, Johanna Langefeld. These women wore gray uniforms with white collars and cuffs, black ties, and caps bearing the Nazi eagle. Though not officially members of the SS, they operated under SS authority and answered to male SS officers. The camp itself was a model of German efficiency. 18 identical wooden barracks surrounded by a high concrete wall topped with electrified barbed wire. Initially designed to hold 3,000 prisoners, Ravensbrück would eventually imprison over 130,000 women from more than 40 countries. At least 28,000 would perish there, from starvation, disease, exhaustion, medical experiments, and deliberate killing. The recruitment. Healthy female workers between the ages of 20 and 40 wanted for a military site read a typical job advertisement in a 1944 German newspaper. Good wages and free board, accommodation and clothing, uniform provided. What the advertisement didn't mention was that the military site was Ravensbrück concentration camp, and the uniform was that of an SS guard. For young women like Hertha Ehlert, a 34-year-old shop assistant from Berlin, the offer was tempting. Germany was at war, jobs were scarce, and the pay, 185 Reichsmarks per month, plus free room and board, was significantly better than what most women could earn elsewhere. I was the oldest of 5 siblings, Ehlert later testified, so I really did not think about it for too long. All I thought was, if I can earn more there, then I'll take the job. Others, like 22-year-old Irma Grese, came from poor rural backgrounds with limited education and prospects. For them, the SS offered not just employment, but status, power, and a sense of belonging to something greater than themselves. Hertha Bode, a 23-year-old nurse's aide from Titero, was a member of the League of German Girls before volunteering for service at Ravensbrück. Standing at 6 feet 3 inches, she would later become known as the sadist of Stutthof for her brutal treatment of prisoners. These women weren't forced into service. Records show that guards who wished to resign were generally allowed to do so without punishment. As one former guard admitted decades later, "Did I make a mistake? No. The mistake was that it was a concentration camp, but I had to go to it. Otherwise I would have been put into it myself. That was my mistake." This claim, however, was a lie. There is no documented case of any woman being imprisoned for refusing to serve as a camp guard. The training and daily life. Upon arrival at Ravensbrück, new recruits underwent a 4-week training program. They learned camp regulations, how to conduct roll calls, and how to maintain discipline among prisoners. They were taught to view the inmates not as human beings, but as enemies of the Reich. dangerous criminals, political subversives, racial inferiors. The training emphasized absolute obedience to superiors and the need for unwavering discipline. Physical punishment of prisoners was officially prohibited by camp regulations, which stated, "Any abuse of inmates by guards is forbidden." Yet in practice, violence was not only tolerated but expected. For the female guards, life at Ravensbrück had its comforts. They lived in attractive cottages with wooden shutters and balconies overlooking the forest and lake. They had regular meals, warm beds, and days off. Some even brought their children to live with them in the camp. "It was the most beautiful time of my life," one former guard later claimed. From their bedrooms, they could see the camp and the chimneys of the crematorium. The contrast between their comfortable existence and the suffering of the prisoners could not have been starker. Unleashed brutality. Each morning, guards would oversee roll call, forcing prisoners to stand at attention for hours regardless of weather conditions. Those too weak to stand were often beaten or sent to the camp prison, known as the bunker. As one survivor recalled, at the roll call, if they then stood 2 hours in the cold, they fell over from weakness. Then the guards set the dogs on them, and if the women were tired, they were beaten with sticks. The guards' power was absolute, and many abused it mercilessly. Irma Grace, who later worked at Auschwitz before returning to Ravensbrück, was described by prisoners as exceptionally beautiful, but exceptionally cruel. She carried a plaited whip made of cellophane that looked like it was made of glass, with wire woven into the tip and colorful beads on the handle. The Irma Grace was bildhübsch, picture-perfect beautiful, one survivor testified, and she was außergewöhnlich schlecht, exceptionally bad. As the war progressed and conditions in the camp deteriorated, the brutality escalated. By 1944, Ravensbrück was severely overcrowded, with barracks built for 250 women housing up to 2,000. Food rations were cut, disease was rampant, and death became commonplace. In November 1944, a large tent was erected between blocks 24 and 26 to house the overflow of prisoners. Up to 4,000 women were crammed inside with only straw on the ground for bedding. The tent had a brick floor, recalled Hungarian Jewish prisoner Kato Gyulai. On that we stood or crouched, of sitting or lying there could be no question. At night we sat literally on the heads or backs of others. Throughout this horror, the female guards continued their abuse. Some, like Johanna Bormann, known as the woman with the dog, used their trained Alsatians to maul prisoners. Others, like Elisabeth Folkenrath, specialized in administering savage beatings. The medical experiments. Perhaps the darkest chapter in Ravensbrück's history was the medical experimentation conducted on prisoners. Beginning in July 1942, SS doctors performed gruesome surgical experiments on 74 Polish women. Nicknamed the rabbits because they were used as laboratory animals and left unable to walk properly. They could only hop. The experiments, overseen by Dr. Karl Gebhardt, involved deliberately inflicting wounds on the women's legs, then infecting them with bacteria, glass, wood splinters, and dirt to simulate battlefield injuries. Various sulfonamide drugs were then tested as treatments. While male doctors performed the surgeries, female medical personnel, including Dr. Herta Oberhäuser, the only female physician tried at the Nuremberg doctors' trial, provided post-operative care. This care often involved deliberately withholding pain medication and administering vinegar-laced water to suffering patients. Female guards were complicit in these atrocities, escorting women to the experimental station and returning to collect those who survived. When 10 Polish women refused to participate in further experiments, guards locked them in the bunker as punishment, where 5 were forcibly operated on. The final months. By early 1945, with Soviet forces approaching from the east, The situation at Ravensbrück became increasingly desperate. In January, a gas chamber was constructed near the crematorium, and between 5,000 and 6,000 prisoners were murdered there in the camp's final months. In March and April, the Swedish Red Cross, through negotiations led by Count Folke Bernadotte, managed to evacuate approximately 7,500 women from Ravensbrück to Sweden and Switzerland. For those who remained, the end was approaching. On April 27, 1945, the SS began evacuating the camp, forcing approximately 20,000 prisoners on death marches toward the north. Many died along the way from exhaustion, starvation, or execution. On April 30th, 1945, advance units of the Soviet Army reached Ravensbrück, finding only about 3,000 prisoners, the sick and dying who had been left behind. Capacity for evil. The story of Ravensbrück's female guards forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the capacity for evil that exists within ordinary people. These women were not monsters born of some unique German pathology. They were products of their time and place. Young women who had grown up under the influence of Nazi propaganda, who had been taught to view certain groups as subhuman, and who found themselves in positions of absolute power over those deemed enemies of the state. Their transformation from ordinary citizens to perpetrators of atrocity followed a predictable pattern. Initial shock gave way to desensitization, which led to participation, and eventually to initiative in committing acts of cruelty. What makes their case particularly disturbing is how it challenges our gendered assumptions about violence and cruelty. We expect men to be capable of brutality, especially in wartime. But women? Our cultural narratives cast women as nurturers, as more empathetic, as less prone to violence. The female guards of Ravensbrück shatter these comforting myths. They remind us that the capacity for cruelty transcends gender, that power corrupts regardless of who wields it, and that the line between civilization and barbarism is thinner than we care to admit. After the war, only 77 of the approximately 3,500 female guards who served at Ravensbrück were brought to trial. Some, like Dorothea Binz and Elisabeth Falkenrath, were sentenced to death and hanged. Others, like Irma Grese, were executed for crimes committed at other camps. Many received prison sentences of varying lengths, though most were released early in the 1950s as the Cold War shifted priorities. The vast majority, however, simply melted back into German society. They married, changed their names, and lived quiet lives, their dark pasts known only to themselves. The story of Ravensbrück's female guards is not just a footnote in the history of the Holocaust. It is a warning about the fragility of moral boundaries, about how easily ordinary people can become complicit in extraordinary evil, when that evil is normalized by authority and ideology. Their legacy serves as a stark reminder that the price of preventing such atrocities is eternal vigilance, not just against tyrannical regimes, but against our own capacity to dehumanize others and to abdicate moral responsibility in the face of authority. For in the end, the most chilling aspect of Ravensbrück's dark secret is not that monsters walked among us disguised as ordinary women, but that ordinary women became monsters, one small choice at a time.